I want to give a special shout out to my patrons, my Bibliosbrand, my Bibliosworn, and my Bibliomancers. Thank you so much for supporting my hobby and passion even more. It means so much to me. Hi everyone, Petrik here. Today's video will be some of the most underrated fantasy books that I've read. I actually wanted to post this video last month, but life, scheduling, and also one of the main reasons why I postponed this video for so long is because there are when I ask in the community tab and also on my Twitter account, what are the most underrated fantasy books that you've read? There are more than 80 fantasy books for me to organize. So that's a lot. That's a lot of underrated fantasy books that I had to organize. And I want to make sure that I put everything into account before I actually made this video. So for this video, for the first part of this video, I will be telling you only about 6 of the most underrated fantasy books that I've read. I have actually looked through all the books that I've read and reviewed. There are so many books. There are so many books that I consider to be underrated, and then they are amazing as well. What I mean by underrated is that the average rating on Goodreads is below 4. But I want to make it clear that even if a book has an average rating of below 4, it doesn't mean that it is immediately or factually bad. It just means, well, just as the rating says, it doesn't click with relatively a lot of readers. So yeah, for the purpose of this video, I'm just going to mention 6, and then someday I will make another video like this, and then I will mention the other books. That's the first part of this video, and then the second part of this video, I will mention 6 of the most frequently mentioned underrated fantasy books according to you, on my community tab and also on my Twitter account. So more or less, this will be similar to the most overrated fantasy series video that I made about 2 months ago. So yeah, let's begin. The first one that I want to talk about is The Children of Hurin by J.R.R. Tolkien and edited by Christopher Tolkien. I don't think I need to talk about The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit here, but I just want to mention that even though The Lord of the Rings is the most popular work by J.R.R. Tolkien and also probably the most highly praised one, I'm going to make an unpopular opinion here, and I'm going to say that The Children of Hurin is, in my opinion, the best book by J.R.R. Tolkien. Yes, even better than The Lord of the Rings. The Children of Hurin currently has an average rating of 3.99 out of 74,000 ratings on Goodreads, and I think that is unacceptable because, as I said, this, in my opinion, is Tolkien's best work, and not only that, this is actually one of my favorite books. Seriously, it is tragic, it is dark, and you know what? Hurin Turambar is one of my favorite characters in fantasy. If you love The Lord of the Rings and you still haven't picked this book up, I highly recommend it. I think this is Tolkien's darkest book, and I loved it. It really made an impact on me. The second book I want to mention is We Ride the Storm by Devin Madson. This is the first book in the Reborn Empire Quartet, and this was originally self-published, so I actually haven't read the traditionally published edition because I'm waiting for the series to be completed, and the series will be completed I think at the end of this year, so not long now. But after that, once the series is completed, I'm going to read We Ride the Storm and the rest of the series. But as of right now, this currently has a 3.92 average rating out of 1,300 ratings on Goodreads. And I think, again, this is so underrated because I love this one, and I think Devin Madson's prose felt efficient, and one of the scenes in this book is so unforgettable. Also, Devin Madson is one of the few authors whose works I've read that has the best display of multiple first-person POV within one book. We Ride the Storm was one of my favorite self-published fantasy books before it was traditionally published by Orbit Books. Discover art is by Nico Delort. And yeah, I love this one. I'm looking forward to reading the rest of the series. And then the third underrated books that I want to mention is The Slow Regard of Silent Things by Petrik Rothfuss. So yeah, despite the popularity and the super high praises for the Kingkiller Chronicle, the first and the second book, The Name of the Wind, and also The Wise Man's Sphere, The Slow Regard of Silent Things actually has a very mixed rating, understandably, because this book is certainly not for everyone. This novella currently has a 3.89 average rating out of 129,000 ratings. So yeah, definitely not as highly praised as The Name of the Wind or The Wise Man's Sphere. But yeah, again, I love this one. This cover art is done by Laura Brett. Yeah, this book is about Auri, one of the most memorable supporting characters in the Kingkiller Chronicle and one of my favorite side characters. I love Auri. I think she's so precious, and yeah, this novella is pretty much about her. I love this one, even though I have to mention that the first time I read through The Slow Regard of Silent Things, I was actually super disappointed because I don't think I was ready for what kind of book this is. There is no dialogue, there's no actions. But after I did a second read through it, I became so in love with this one. So yeah, if you're a fan of the Kingkiller Chronicle and you somehow still haven't picked this book up, I highly recommend it. But you know what? Please do make sure you know what you're getting into is not the same kind of book as the main books in the Kingkiller Chronicle. And then book number 4 on this list is The God of Prayer by Gareth Hanrahan. Yeah, this is the first book in the Black Iron Legacy, and this is one of my favorite debuts. The cover art by Richard Anderson looks so gorgeous, and I actually talk about this book plenty of times on this channel already. This book currently is 3 books long, and this one is my favorite of them all. The God of Prayer currently has a 3.86 average rating out of 3,600 ratings. Again, I love this one. This is one of the few books that I've read, one of the few fantasy books that I've read that definitely reminded me of playing Bloodborne. Yeah, Bloodborne by From Software Games. It is imaginative, it has an unconventional and very vivid prose, and most importantly, I think this is one of the very few books that actually utilize Deus Ex Machina magnificently. I'm not actually a fan of Deus Ex Machina, but this time it worked really well. And then book number 5 on this list is The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu. I mean, you know this book will appear on this list. I have already talked about how underrated this book is because this is one of my favorite books, and after reading The Wall of Storms, the Dandelion Dynasty has already become one of my favorite series of all time. Even though I'm not finished with the series yet. I just posted a full spoiler-free review of The Grace of Kings on this channel last month. I'm going to link my review on the description. Actually, I'm going to link all the reviews of the books I mentioned here on the description below. But for now, The Grace of Kings currently has a 3.74 average rating out of 14,500 ratings, and that is insane. I think this deserves a much higher average ratings. Ken Liu's reimagining of the Chu-Han contention is nothing short of epic, brilliant, and complex. Mata Zindu and Kunigaru are so lovable characters, and I love these two characters so much. And one of the characters introduced in this book, Din Mazzotti, has become one of the best characters that I've read ever. I love this character so much, especially after reading through The Grace of Kings and especially The Wall of Storms. If you haven't started reading this series yet, might as well do it now because the fourth and final book in the series, Speaking Bones, is coming out within this month. And then finally, the last book on this list before I move on to the most frequently mentioned underrated books according to you is The Bard's Blade by Brian D. Anderson. This cover art is done by Felix Ortiz, and yeah, this one is immensely underrated. It currently has a 3.6 average rating out of 400 ratings. So even though this book has been released for more than 2 years now, it's still very underrated and it's still very underhyped. I don't think a lot of people actually love this book. But you know what? I actually really love this one. I know that this is not the most complex fantasy series out there, but it was so accessible and I love reading Bard as a main character. And I think The Bard's Blade actually came at the right time when I was really in need of reading through an accessible fantasy books that has well-written characterizations. And yeah, this book certainly delivered, and I always love description of music in my fantasy books. Just like the Dandelion Dynasty, the third and final book in the series will be released within this year. And now for part 2 of this video, it will be the most underrated books according to you. As I said in the beginning of this video, there were more than 80 different fantasy books mentioned here. So yeah, that's a lot of numbers, okay? And I'm going to mention the top 6 most frequently mentioned underrated fantasy books. And the first one is Curse of the Mistwraith by Janny Wurts. This is the first book in Wars of Light and Shadow series. This one currently has an average rating of 3.76 out of 5,000 ratings. So yeah, even though this book has been released for more than 2 decades, I think, and every time the topic of the most underrated fantasy series is mentioned, well, it's almost likely that Wars of Light and Shadow will be there. Yeah, and honestly speaking, Wars of Light and Shadow is one of my priority series to start and finish within this year, but considering that this is June already, I don't think that will be possible. But I'm just hoping that more and more people will check out Janny Wurts' books, and I definitely will be one of the readers who will read this one in the future because I really love To Write Hell's Chasm and also Rift War Empire Trilogy by Raymond E. Weiss and also Janny Wurts. To Write Hell's Chasm is a great standalone by Janny Wurts alone. And I'm assuming, considering how much I enjoyed these past 4 books by her, I'm assuming that I'm going to really love Wars of Light and Shadow. I'm pretty much just waiting for me to be in the right mood to tackle this long series because this series is huge. It is 11 books long. The last book will be coming, I think, next year. So yeah, not too long from now, this long series will be completed, and I definitely will check this series out to its completion. And then the next book on this list is Empire in Black and Gold by Adrian Tchaikovsky. So this is the first book in Shadows of the App series. So just like Wars of Light and Shadow, I've been hearing about how underrated this series is. The Shadows of the App is 10 books long, and even though Adrian Tchaikovsky is very famous for his sci-fi books, but before he became popular with his sci-fi books, he has actually released a massive epic fantasy series, and yeah, this is it. is Shadows of the App, and I haven't read this one. The first book currently has a 3.71 average rating out of 9,600 ratings, and I heard that the Broken Binding will be releasing a special edition for each book in this series. So I think when the time comes, I will be able to finally read through this series. I heard pretty much a lot of good things about this series, even though not too often, but I have really enjoyed reading through The Children of Time and The Doors of Eden. I think I will really enjoy reading through Shadows of the App as well. And then the next book on this list is The Wolf of Oren-Yaro by K.S. Villoso. This book currently has a 3.69 average rating out of 2,400 ratings on Goodreads, and I have actually read the sub-published fantasy edition of The Wolf of Oren-Yaro. So I haven't read the traditionally published edition yet, but I had mixed feelings regarding the sub-published fantasy edition, I think this is a great book, but the main characters can be super infuriating for a lot of sections in the book. So yeah, that's quite a bit of a challenge here. But by the end of the novel, on my first read, I definitely find out why the main character is written that way. So I am looking forward to reading the second and the third book, because I heard from a lot of people that the second and the third book is supposedly significantly much better than The Wolf of Oren-Yaro. And I own the entire trilogy already. The new cover art done by Simon Goynard looks amazing. And then the next book on this list is Acacia by David Anthony Durham. I didn't know about this book. I haven't even heard about this book or series or author before I actually tweeted this out. But this is in the top 3 of the most frequently mentioned underrated fantasy books according to my followers on YouTube and also on Twitter, especially on Twitter. So if you have read this book or series, do let me know whether this is actually worth checking out. Some have actually mentioned that this is A Song of Ice and Fire, the light version. So yeah. And then on the runner-up spot is Perdido Street Station by China Mieville. This is the first book in the new Crobuzon series. I have actually heard about China Mieville and also Perdido Street Station for a long time now, but I haven't really checked it out until I started my own YouTube channel here. Because some of you have mentioned in details why I should pick this book up, and yeah, I already picked this book up. It's just a matter of time until I finally decide to read through it, and hopefully within next year. One of the comments said this: Perdido Street Station by China Mieville. It has a 3.96 average rating. A decent rating, but I hardly ever hear anyone talk about it. Takes place in a vibrant city full of different forms of intelligent life, all clashing against each other. A cool mix of sci-fi, fantasy, and horror. It just feels so gritty and real with a cinematic conclusion. Oh, by the way, the book is not angry, it's just a ripping good yarn. All of that sounds good to me, and on top of them, I think someone has mentioned that this takes place in one city, so I think this will count as an urban high fantasy that I love to read about. So I am really keeping my fingers crossed that I will be able to read this one within next year. And finally, on the number 1 spot, this is another series that I want to tackle within next year, and this is The Darkness That Comes Before by R. Scott Bakker. This is the first book in the Prince of Nothing trilogy. I definitely know about this book. I definitely know about the Prince of Nothing and the Second Apocalypse. I have actually talked about it on my channel plenty of times. Just like the Wars of Blood and Shadow, I'm pretty much just waiting for me to be in the right reading mood for this one, because many people have agreed that the entire Second Apocalypse series, which is Prince of Nothing and the sequel series, are the grimmest of grim dark fantasy series out there. And I don't think there's anyone who dispute that. And one of the comments who mentioned the Second Apocalypse mentioned this: this series is exceeding dark and horrible and difficult to read due to the philosophy. Often confusing and definitely not perfect, but man, I loved it. So this is more or less the same kind of things I heard from the fans of the series. So basically, this series is a very hit and miss series. But if it is a hit, then you won't find a better grimdark fantasy series than the Second Apocalypse. But if it's a miss, well, then it's a miss. And considering the dark content of the series, it's not surprised that The Darkness That Comes Before has a 3.8 average rating out of 19,000 ratings so far on Goodreads. But just like the new Crobuzon series, I am hoping that I will be able to get to at least the Prince of Nothing trilogy within next year. So yeah, that's pretty much it for today's video. What do you think about the list of underrated books that I mentioned and the one that's according to you? Do you agree with the state of them being underrated right now? And I want to mention it once again, that just because the book is underrated doesn't mean that the book or the series immediately suck. It's not that way. Sometimes it's just too divisive, but sometimes, just like the example of the Second Apocalypse, those who loved it to death, but those who disliked it, well, it can't be helped. People have different tastes. But yeah, that's pretty much it from me today. Thank you once again for contributing to this video. As always, thank you so much for watching, and thank you for your support. Bye bye. Lastly, I want to say thank you so much once again to all my patrons who keep on supporting my hobby and passion even more.